بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم افتح لنا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك وزدنا علما يا كريم. This is our 10th lesson now on our commentary of Risalat al-Jami'ah, and we are covering Hajj. So in our last lesson we talked about the arkan or the integrals of Hajj, and we talked about obligatory aspects of tawaf and sa'i, as well as standing on, as well as the arkan of Hajj. In this lesson, we'll be talking about the wajibat. So we said that there's a difference between arkan, integrals, and wajibat. The arkan, your Hajj has to have them. If your Hajj doesn't have them, then your Hajj is not complete. The wajibat of Hajj, or the obligatory aspects, your Hajj also has to have them. But if you don't, if you miss one of them or you miss multiple of them, then you would pay an expiation, and your Hajj would still be considered accomplished, so to speak. So let's jump right into it. The author says, وَوَاجِبَاتُ الْحَجِّ الْإِحْرَامُ مِنَ الْمِيقَاتِ وَالْمَبِيتُ بِمُزْدَلِفَةَ لَيْلَةَ النَّحْرِ وَالْمَبِيتُ لَيَالِ التَّشْرِيقِ بِمِنَى وَالرَّمْيُ وَطَوَافُ الْوَدَاعِ. So these are the wajib aspects, or the obligatory aspects. One is the ihram from a miqat, staying at night at Muzdalifah, the night of Eid, staying at night for the days of Tashriq at Mina, al-Ramyu, which is throwing the pebbles, and we'll get into detail of that, and Tawaf al-Wada', which is the farewell tawaf. So we'll go through each of these in a bit of detail. The first one, al-ihramu min al-miqat. We said al-ihram is an integral, but doing it or entering into a state of ihram from a miqat is a wajib aspect. So a miqat is a boundary, and a miqat can refer to a place or a time, right? And we already talked about the time that Hajj can be in, but here we're using miqat to mean a physical place. A physical place. And so there are different miqats, so to speak, that the Prophet ﷺ established. Okay, so the classical books of fiqh will mention them by name. So the miqat for someone coming from Mecca, their miqat for Hajj would just be Mecca itself. For Umrah, it would be the closest place outside the Haram. For someone coming from Yemen, their miqat would be a place called Tihama. For a person coming from, in classical books they'll call it Najd. Right now it's the area around Riyadh. It's called Qarn al-Manazil, and we actually call it As-Sayl al-Kabir. That's what it's called right now, As-Sayl al-Kabir. From Iraq, it would be a place called Dhatu Irqin, and if you're coming from Syria or the Sham region, if you're coming from Egypt or anywhere west of that, your miqat would be a place called Al-Juhfa, and that's probably the miqat the people that are coming from the west would pass by. Juhfa is a place between Mecca and Medina. It's towards the western side. If you're coming from Medina and sort of the Sham area, which is also north but a little to the side, then your miqat would be a place called Dhul Hulayfa, and it's the farthest miqat. So if you're coming from Medina, you're planning on making Umrah, your miqat would be a place called Dhul Hulayfa, and so on and so forth. The names aren't really that important. If you're coming in like an airplane, they would tell you when you're about to cross the miqat. Okay, but the important thing is that you have to that's a wajib of Hajj, which is to enter into a state of ihram when you're passing a miqat. So if you pass a miqat and you wanted to perform one of the rites like Hajj or Umrah, then it's obligatory to be in a state of ihram. But if you don't, and you start engaging in the rites, then you have to pay an expiation. If you passed it and you wanted to go for Umrah, for example, or Hajj, and you don't engage in any of the rites, and you go back and enter into a state of ihram, then you don't have to pay the expiation. Okay. Sometimes what happens is that a person passes the miqat and they weren't planning on performing any of the rites. So they were just planning on going to Mecca or Jeddah, for example. But then when they pass it, all of a sudden they decide that they want to perform Umrah. Then the place at which they decide that would be their miqat. So they wouldn't have to go back. Okay, the second one, that's the first wajib of Hajj. The second one is al-mabit bi Muzdalifa laylat al-nahr. That's being present at Muzdalifa the night of Eid. So we said laylat al-nahr is the night of Eid, and that's the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. Okay, so after being at Arafah on the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, you would generally go to Muzdalifa for that night, the night of Eid, which is the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. You'd go there, people will go there and stay there for the night. Okay, and they would delay the Maghrib and Isha and pray at Muzdalifa, and they would stay there until Fajr. Okay, they would stay there until Fajr. But it doesn't have to be that order, but that's the recommended order. Okay, the author says al-mabit, but the wajib here is just to be present at Muzdalifa for a period of time. On the night of Eid. Okay, so if you're there for a period of time in the second half of the night, then that would accomplish the wajib aspect. So it doesn't even have to be that you stay there. If you walk in and you walk out, that would accomplish the wajib aspect of being there at Muzdalifa. Okay, but if you don't go to Muzdalifa and you just skip it, you'd have to pay an expiation. Okay, the expiation would be a sheep. Would be the same thing. Would be a sheep that you'd sacrifice. But if they're unavailable, then you'd fast 3 days in Hajj and 7 afterwards. Okay, so that's al-mabit bi Muzdalifa on the night of Eid. Okay, the third thing that he mentions is al-mabit layali at-tashriq bi Mina. So here mabit means something different. Okay, so we have the 3 days of he says the nights of tashriq. So we have 3 days of tashriq, as we said, or 3 days of tashriq. That's if you don't leave early. So we said that you can do 2 days of tashriq or you can do 3 days of tashriq. If you're only doing 2, then you'd have to leave after Dhuhr and before Maghrib on the second day. Okay, if you're staying there past Maghrib, or if you're there until Maghrib comes around, you have to stay there for the 3rd day. Okay, so if you are going to leave after the 2nd day, that condition applies. You have to leave Mina before Maghrib. Okay, and here I said mabit means something different. Mabit means here for most of the night. So for Muzdalifa is just a lahza, it's just a moment in the second half of the night. But here in Mina you have to be there for most of the night. So if you stay for a little more than half of the night, that counts. So if you the night is from Maghrib to Fajr. So if you count the hours between Maghrib and Fajr and divide them in 2, that period would be half of it. So if you stay a little bit more than half of that, then that would be there. You would have been there for most of the night, and that would accomplish the wajib for each of the 2 nights that you're there, or the 3 nights that you're there. Okay, and leaving Mina without having a good reason, you'd have to pay an expiation. It's the same as the expiation for not being there for Muzdalifa. Okay, the third thing that the author mentions is al-rami. Okay, and there's 2 kinds of rami. The first one is pelting the Jamratul Aqaba. The first one is pelting the Jamratul Aqaba, and that's the third and the last pillar. So these days, for example, when you go for Hajj, you'd go in. They have it. How do I describe it? They have it almost like a parking garage, so to speak, of like maybe three different levels. So you can only enter from one side, and when you enter from that side, the first one that you would come is what is the smallest one, or what we consider the smallest one, and then the middle one, or the medium one, and then the last one, which is what we call Jamratul Aqaba. So it's a one-way street. You can only come in one way and exit one way. That's how it is right now. And each of them are big walls, so to speak. So you'll come across when you walk in, you'll come across the first one. It's like a big wall. And then after that, a little bit further on, you'll come across the second one, and it's like a big wall again. And then the third one, it's also a big wall. So when you come in on the pelting the Jamratul Aqaba is you do it on the time for it starts from the middle of the night of Eid, the middle of the night of Eid, and you can't do it before. So it starts from the middle of the night of Eid and it ends up until its preferred time ends up until the Maghrib of the same day, the day of Eid. Okay, that's its preferred time. For all of the Rami that we're talking about, the permissibility extends up until the last day of Tashriq. So if you didn't do any of them, and you left all of them, so the day of Eid you do the Jamratul Aqaba, that's the last one. And then each of the days of Tashriq you would do all three. So if you didn't do any of them, you can leave all of them and still accomplish them by doing them all on the last day. Okay, but it's the preferred time for doing Jamratul Aqaba, the third one, is to do it from the middle of the night of the day of Eid up until Maghrib. And it's not very confusing the way they've set it up now, because when you go the first day, everybody will only be throwing it at the last one, and the other two, I think they might even be blocked off. Or they put like metal barriers around it, so no one's going to get confused. Okay, so that's the first type of Rami, and that's the one that you would do on the day of Eid, and it's the last one. It's called Jamratul Aqaba. The other type of Rami is throwing at all three pillars. And like I said, you wouldn't do that on the day of Eid. You would do that on the 3 days of Tashriq if you're not leaving early, and the 2 days if you do leave early. Okay. So the time for doing this one would start from the time of Dhuhr, the time of Zawal. Okay, and it would end. Its preferred time again would end with Maghrib. Okay, so between Dhuhr and Maghrib would be the time when you would throw at the 3 pillars in the days of Tashriq. Okay, and like I said, the permissibility extends up until the end of all 3 days. If you by mistake miss one, or you realize that you did it wrong, for example, you could do it on another day. But the preferred time, that's the preferred time. Okay, so let's talk about what exactly you're doing. So you're throwing 7 stones, 7 little pebbles at each one. So on the day of Eid, you're taking 7 stones and you're throwing them at the Jamratul Aqaba. And then on the days of Tashriq, you're doing the same for each one. Okay, so there are a bunch of conditions for them, but most of them are pretty obvious. The first one is that you have to do them in order. So you can't go in and then decide that you're going to do the middle one, and then the small one, and then the big one. You have to do it in order. And again, the way it's set up right now is that like it would be really difficult to fail at this condition, like because you go in from one side, and the first one that you come across is the small one, and then the middle one, and then the big one. So it's a one-way road. So you won't mess up the order. But this was a concern when they didn't have that system. So you can go up to any one that you wanted and do it in whatever order you sort of saw fit. Okay, but that is difficult to see that happening now. Okay, the second one is that you have to throw a pebble. Okay, which is you have to throw like a stone. So you can't throw like a piece of wood or anything else. And all you have to do is throw like a pebble that's about the size of a pea. So you're not supposed to throw like boulders or anything. Like you're not supposed to pick up a rock and throw it. It's just like a little pebble. That's pretty much it. And yeah, you shouldn't throw rocks. Yeah, I mean, even when we went for Hajj, for example, we were collecting. I mean, some of the mashayikh would actually turn away some because they were too big, and they weren't really that big, but they would just turn them away. They'd be like, "It's too big. It's not a pebble. This is a stone." You know. So you have to throw a pebble. The other thing is that you have to throw it, so you can't place it in the basin. You have to throw it with your hands, so you can't throw it with something else. If you're not able to, then you could throw it. Some of the books say that if you're not able to throw it with your hands, you could throw it with like a slingshot. But you have to throw it with your hands if you're able to. The goal the goal isn't the wall or the pillar or the pillar. Like the goal is actually the basin. So like when you go right now, like I said, you'll come across it, and you'll be walking, and you'll come across it, and it'll be like a big wall. So, and there's a basin around it, and all of the pebbles, when they hit the wall, they go down inside. So the goal isn't actually to hit the basin or the pillar. That's just a marker. The goal is actually the basin. So all of the pebbles actually are collected, and the basin, the way it's set up right now is that it's a number of levels, but the basin actually goes down to the original basin, so to speak, or the original size of the basin. So even if you look at it and it looks huge and you think that, well, I'm not getting the actual basin, all the pebbles actually go down into the original size. Okay, and you have to throw 7 at each one, and you have to throw them individually. So you can't take like a fistful of pebbles and like throw and throw it. That would just count as one. So you have to do them individually, and you have to get it inside. And now it's not difficult. Like even if you hit the wall, it's not gonna bounce out. It'll go inside. But those are the conditions that they mentioned for pelting. Okay, or rami. Okay, the second one, or the next thing that he mentions, or the wajib, is tawaf al-wada'. Right? That's the last thing that he mentions. Tawaf al-wada' is wajib for anyone who wants to leave Mecca for travel or like to go back home. So it's irrespective of whether a person is there for Hajj or Umrah or something else. So it's not part of the rites. Like it's not part of the rituals of Hajj or Umrah, but it's mentioned in these chapters because people are coming there for Hajj or Umrah, so they have to know that. So if you're leaving Mecca for any reason, then you'd have to do the tawaf al-wada' is wajib. Okay, and this tawaf is you do it. It'd be the last thing you do before you leave Mecca. So you do it after you finish all of your other rites. Okay, and you wouldn't hang around after you do tawaf al-wada'. Tawaf al-wada' is a farewell tawaf. So it's like a farewell to the haram. You do it after you finish everything that you need to do in Mecca. So barring like things that are related to your travel, like going to your hotel, getting your stuff, putting your things together, that kind of thing, getting gas, and so on and so forth. All of those things that are usually reasonably connected to a person's travel, that you can do that after tawaf al-wada'. But if you decide, well, I want to go to a friend's house in Mecca after, or something like that, or we need to sit around, or that kind of thing, that would you'd have to go back and do the tawaf al-wada'. Okay, so it should be the last major thing that you do before you leave Mecca. Okay, so those are the wajibat of Hajj, and if you don't do them, then you have to pay the expiation that we mentioned. Okay, the author now moves on to Sunan al-Hajj. So that's the third part of the classification that we did. So we did Arkan, the integrals, and now we just did that was our last lesson, and now we did the wajibat, the things that have that entail an expiation if you don't do them, but don't render the Hajj itself invalid. And now we're doing Sunan, or Sunnah aspects. So the author rahimahullah says, وَأَمَّا السُّنَنْ فَكُلُّ مَا سِوَى الْأَرْكَانِ وَالْوَاجِبَاتِ. So sunan is everything that isn't a rukn or a wajib. So anything that you've heard or you've seen that people do, or you know that people should do in Hajj that we didn't mention already, is a sunnah aspect. Okay, and so let's look at some of the sunnah aspects. Obviously, the fact that you don't have to pay an expiation doesn't mean that you should leave it. It just means that it just has a different legal ruling. But the fact that it's sunnah should make a person want to do it, right? Not make a person want to leave it. So there are a lot of sunnah aspects. One of the most prominent ones is what they call the talbiyah, and that's something that almost everybody knows because they've heard it so many times. A talbiyah is to say labbaik Allahumma labbaik, labbaik la sharika laka labbaik, in al-hamda wa ni'mata laka wal mulk la sharika lak. So labbaik means Labbaik is kind of word that you'd say to mean like, here I am, I'm kind of at your service, and people still say it. So um, if I say, for example, Amr could say to me, Labbaik, right? People still say that. It means like, I'm here, like, what do you want, kind of thing, like, I'm here at your service, right? So here, a person who's in a state of ihram, they'd say that Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik, like, it means that here I am, your Lord, I'm at your service. So it's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has called people to Hajj, and they're saying, okay, here we are, we've answered your call, we're at your service, right? So it's a really powerful thing to say, right? To say that here we are, we're here in your, visiting your house, and we're here at your service. Okay, so you say, Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik, and they say, Labbaik la sharika lak, Labbaik, we're here at your service, there is no, you have no partner, and we're here at your service. Inna alhamda wa ni'mata lak, that all praise and all bounties are belong to you. Wal mulk, and the dominion. La sharika lak, there is no partner. You have no partner. Okay, so this talbiyah is recommended to say. It's recommended to say it after you enter into a state of ihram. And as long as you're in a state of ihram, like usually when your state or like your place changes. So when you reach a place, or when you set off, when you get up, when you sit down, when you gather together as a group, when the day starts, when the day ends, after prayers, for example, you would say the talbiyah. Okay, so that's when they say you would do it. You do it like when your state or your place kind of changes. You wouldn't do it during the tawaf or sa'i. Okay, you wouldn't do it after you start the rituals. Okay, so that's the talbiyah. There are some sunan that are associated with ihram, and we're not going to cover all of the sunan, but we'll just mention some of them. One of them is ghusl, is performing the ghusl before you enter the state of ihram. And ghusl, like we mentioned before, it's a sunan, but it's a sunnah for pretty much anything that requires meeting or gathering with other people. Okay, so when you're entering into a state of ihram, you're going to meet other people, or you're going to be with other people. So that's one of the reasons why ghusl is recommended. Ghusl is recommended for many of the aspects of Hajj. Classical works of fiqh would say that it's recommended to make ghusl. So Arafah and all of these other things, they say it's recommended to make ghusl. And the reason for that is because you're going to be with other people. So you don't want to harm other people with like your body odor. So that's why it's recommended. That's one of the sunnah associated with ihram. One of them is perfuming your body. It's perfuming your body, not your clothes, before you put on your ihram. Speaking of, one of the sunnah is wearing 2 pieces of white cloth for men. So like wearing a white piece of cloth for the bottom and one for the top. It doesn't have to be white, but that's a sunnah. So everybody, virtually everyone, it seems, wears white now, but it's not wajib. Okay, and to perform two rak'ah before, or to pray 2 units of prayer before you enter into a state of ihram is also a sunnah. Those are some of the sunnah that are associated with ihram. There are some sunnah that are associated with tawaf. Okay, so we already said, we already described what tawaf is. So there are some sunnah. There are a lot of sunnah that are associated with it, and we'll cover a few of them. One of them is walking it, walking the tawaf. One of them is touching the black stone and kissing it. It's a sunnah aspect as well. Although now, if you go for Hajj, it would be very difficult. It would be very difficult to do so. And to make a dua between the Rukn al-Yamani and the Hajj al-Aswad. So let's say you're going around the Kaaba. This is the Kaaba, for example, and this is the Hajj al-Aswad. This is the black stone, and this is where you would start your tawaf from, and you'd go around this way. This last corner right before you get to the black stone. So this corner right here is what they call the Rukn al-Yamani. Okay, because it faces Yemen, or it's close to Yemen, that direction. So between this Rukn al-Yamani and between this Hajj al-Aswad, you would say, you'd make a specific dua. it's رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. Okay, so that's it's a sunnah to say that. It's رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيا حَسَنَةً, that give, or our Lord, give us the good of this life, وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً, and the good of the hereafter, وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ, and protect us or safeguard us from the torment of the fire. So it's recommended to say that between the Rukn al-Yamani and the Hajj al-Aswad. Okay. It's also recommended for men to walk fast around the first three. So there's 7 of them. There's 7 times you have to go around. The first 3, it's recommended that you walk fast, not like you run like a stampede or something, but that you walk that you walk fast at a brisk pace. So that's the sunan of tawaf. It's also recommended for tawaf and sa'i that you uncover your right shoulder. So you'll wear, for men, you'd wear usually one white piece around your waist, and that would cover your awrah from the bottom. And then you'd wear a white piece of cloth around your shoulders to cover your top as well. So the sunnah is to uncover your right, or in the Shafi'i school, it's to uncover your right shoulder during tawaf and sa'i. Just during tawaf and sa'i. So you'd take like the piece of cloth and you'd put it, or you'd wrap it under your right shoulder like this, and you'd throw it over your left shoulder, so your right shoulder would be uncovered. Okay, so that's a sunnah aspect of tawaf. Okay, and then after the tawaf, you'd make it's sunnah to perform 2 rak'ahs. 2 rak'ahs, and for those 2 rak'ahs, you would cover your shoulder. So you'd uncover it to do the tawaf, and then you'd go to, the sunnah aspect would be to perform 2 rak'ahs. So you'd cover your shoulder, and then when you go to do the sa'i, you'd uncover it again. Okay, and it doesn't have to be behind the maqam of Ibrahim. So it could be anywhere. It could be, people like to pray behind the maqam of Ibrahim, but it could be anywhere that you perform it. Okay, those are the sunnah that are associated with tawaf, and some of them are associated with sa'i too. It's recommended to run in the middle of the sa'i. So it's a little bit hard to describe it if you haven't seen it, but you're going between Safa and Marwa. And right now there are like bright green fluorescent lights for the area where you would run, where it's recommended to run between Safa and Marwa. So you'd walk a little bit between Safa and Marwa, and then you'd see where there are like bright green lights overhead, and that's the area in which it was recommended to run. So you'd run fast in that area if you're able to do so, and then you'd continue walking up until Marwa, and the same when you come back. That's what it's like right now. Okay, those are the sunan. There are more sunan that are described in longer works, but those will suffice for now. For Arafat, there are some sunan that are mentioned. One is to combine the day and the night there. So he said that the time of Arafat is from Zawal on the 9th day, and it ends on Fajr. It ends at Fajr, the day of Eid, the 10th. So the sunnah aspect is to combine a part of the day and part of the night. So to combine part of the day, you just have to be there before Maghrib, and to be there for part of the night, you just be there for a little bit after Maghrib. That's the sunnah aspect, and it's not wajib. I think that most buses now would leave around or before Maghrib. I think it seems like that. Another sunnah aspect of there is being in a state of purity and spending the time making dua and crying. All of those are aspects that are sunnah while you're at Arafah. Okay. So those are the sunnah aspects that we'll mention. The author now goes to talk about the legal ruling that are associated with all of these categories. So he says, فَمَنْ تَرَكَ رُكْنًا لَمْ يَصِحْ حَجُّهُ, that whoever leaves a rukn, that his hajj isn't sahih, it's not valid. And وَلَا يَحِلُّ مِنْ إِحْرَامِهِ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ بِهِ, that he wouldn't come out of his state of ihram until he does them. So the few arkan that we mentioned, the person would have to, a person, if he doesn't do them, he would remain in a state of ihram. Right? And he says, وَلَا يَجْبُرُهُ دَمٌ وَلَا غَيْرُهُ, that you couldn't make it up by doing something else. Okay, so you can't make up a missed rukn by paying an expiation or by like sacrificing a sheep, because it's different from the wajibat. And you wouldn't come out of your state of ihram um, uh, if you have like an outstanding integral that you haven't performed. Okay, so to get out of it, you have to do these. You have to do these integrals. And there's a bit of detail to this. He says, وَثَلَاثَةٌ مِنَ الْأَرْكَانِ لَا تَفُوتُهُ مَا دَامَ حَيًّا وَهِيَ الطَّوَافُ وَالسَّعْيُ وَالْحَلْقُ. So there's three of the arkan that um, that remain over your head, so to speak, as long as you're alive. So if you don't do them, they remain hanging over you. You have to do them. They're the tawaf and the sa'i and the halq, the shaving and cutting of the head. So integrals, there are two types. One is types that never leave you, so to speak, if you haven't done them, and one is one that you can get out of. So the one that has an end time is Arafah. Okay, so if you enter into your state of ihram and you don't make it to Arafah, like if you come after Fajr, for example, on the 10th of the Hijjah, we said what you do, right? You've missed Hajj, but you can get out of it by performing the actions of Umrah. So you do the tawaf, you do the sa'i, and you do the halq, like you'd shave your hair, and that would get you out of the state of ihram, and you'd have to perform Hajj the following year, and you'd have to pay an expiation. Okay, but the other three don't have an end time. So tawaf, sa'i, and halq, if they don't end as long as the author says, as long as a person's alive, they have to do them. So you can't make them up by paying an expiation. So yeah, you have to make sure that you do them correctly, and you don't leave and go back to Canada, for example, and you haven't done the tawaf, because it would still be hanging over you. Okay, and just as a reminder, we said that there's two tahalluls, and when a person does, so there's three things that you have to do: the rami, and what's it called? The rami and the tawaf and the halq. So if you do any of those two things, you'd halfway exit the state of ihram. And when you do the third thing, then you'd fully exit the state of ihram. So after the first tahallul, after doing any two of those things, you can do any of the things that were previously impermissible, except the things that are related to the opposite gender, like entering into a marriage contract or intercourse or foreplay. Okay, and after you do the third thing, then you can do any of those things. Okay, the author says, وَمَنْ تَرَكَ شَيْئًا مِنَ الْوَاجِبَاتِ صَحَّ حَجُّهُ وَلَزِمَهُ دَمْ وَعَلَيْهِ إِثْمٌ إِنْ لَمْ يُعْذَرْ. That if you don't do a wajib, that your hajj is valid, but لَزِمَهُ دَمْ, that you have to pay an expiation. And وَعَلَيْهِ إِثْمٌ إِنْ لَمْ يُعْذَرْ, that you're sinful if you're not excused. If you didn't have a good reason for it, then leaving them is sinful. Okay, but you can make it up with an expiation, and we've already covered this. So he says, وَمَنْ تَرَكَ شَيْئًا مِنَ السُّنَنِ فَلَا شَيْءَ عَلَيْهِ وَلَكِنْ تَفُوتُهُ الْفَضِيلَةِ. That if you don't do a sunnah, your hajj is valid, but you don't have to pay anything, but obviously you're missing out on a huge benefit. Right? So it's a good idea to acquaint yourself with the sunnah of hajj and do them, so that you don't miss out, or that you're not performing a minimalist hajj, especially because for most people, hajj is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Okay. Right? So it's a good idea to know what you're doing when you go to hajj, and to have an idea of like the things that you need to do at each place that you go for hajj, because we've covered it as a sort of, you must do this and you must be there, but we haven't really considered all of the sunnah. So it's a good idea to fill out your schedule with what are the actual sunnah that you need to do, and not, end up, for example, at Muzdalifah and then say, well, what am I supposed to do here? I'm here for the whole night. I don't know what to do. So it's better to have an idea, so that you don't miss out on the benefit, as the author says. Okay, so now we've covered the arkan, and we've covered the wajibat and the sunan. So we're going to talk now about things that are impermissible to do in hajj. Okay, these muharramatul ihram, or things that are impermissible to do while in ihram, they're there to remind you that you're in a state of ihram. So there's nothing wrong with these things. They're just certain restrictions that remind you that you're in a state of worship, and so that they keep you in a kind of a state of vigilance while you're performing these rituals and rites. Okay, then these things become haram, and they're sinful to do if you do them intentionally. Okay, and of course if you know that they're impermissible. Okay, and doing them for the most part requires an expiation, and the expiation is one of choice, that you can either sacrifice a sheep and feed 6 people, or you fast 3 days. Okay, sorry, there are 3 things: that you can sacrifice a sheep, or you can feed 6 people, or you can fast 3 days. Okay. So the author mentions a bunch of things that are impermissible. He says, وَيَحْرُمُ سَتْرُ رَأْسِ الرَّجُلِ وَوَجْهِ الْمَرْأَةِ المحرمين أو بعضهما وإزالة الظفر والشعر ودهن شعر الرأس واللحية وتطيب جميع البدن. And then he goes on to talk about nikah. So the things that are impermissible generally, one of them has to do with clothing. So the first one that he mentions is ستر رأس الرجل. That's covering the head of a man. So you can't cover, like for example, the thing that I'm wearing on my head right now is considered a covering. So I can't wear this if I'm in a state of ihram. So anything that's considered like a covering, like a baseball cap, or that kind of thing, or like a ghutra or a turban, or any of those things that cover your head, you can't wear them. If it's something that's not considered like a covering, like if it's a rope or something like that, that wouldn't be considered, or your own hands, or an umbrella, those are not considered coverings on the head. Those wouldn't fall under the rubric of things that are impermissible. So he says, سَتْرُ وَجْهِ الْمَرْأَةِ. So covering a woman's face is impermissible while she's in a state of ihram. Okay, so if if she has a cloth, some of the books of fiqh say that if she's around foreign males, for example, she can put a cloth over her face, but it can't touch her face. So some people, you might see some people do that, especially people from Saudi Arabia, or Shafi'is, for example, from like Malaysia or Indonesia. You'll see them. They'll be wearing like a baseball cap. No, seriously, they'll be wearing like a baseball cap, and then they would have like a cloth covering it, so it'd be like away from their face, because you can't have the cloth cover their face. So that's why they're doing that, because you can't cover the face. But if the cloth touches the face and they don't remove it, they have to pay a fidya. They have to pay an expiation, okay, because it's impermissible. Okay, so each time the cloth touches her face, she has to pay, and she doesn't remove it, she'd have to pay an expiation because it's impermissible. So that's ستر وجه المرأة المحرمين. So obviously that has to be a man or a woman in a state of ihram. أو بعضهما, that's covering like part of the. It doesn't have to be the entire head or the entire face. Covering part of it is also impermissible. Also impermissible is wearing something that he doesn't mention it explicitly, but wearing something that encompasses the body or part of it is also impermissible. So some people think that it's something that's stitched, but it's not something that's stitched. It's something that encircles the body like a normal piece of clothing. So like the thalb that I'm wearing, for example, right now, it encircles my body like a piece of clothing would. So they're thinking about a piece of clothing as something that would encircle your body, like this, or like pants, which encircles your body, or like underwear, it also encircles your body. So it doesn't matter if it's like stitched or if it's clasped or if it's knitted or whatever. As long as it encircles the body like a normal piece of clothing, that would be impermissible. But if you take like a cloth that isn't stitched or something like that and you wrap it around your body, it wouldn't be impermissible. Okay, like they do with the ihram. Okay, the top part, like men would usually wear 2 parts. The top part you can't clasp or you can't button it, you can't stitch it. But the bottom you can, and you can like put a rope around it, Um, or you can wear like a belt around it. Okay, but the top part, no. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind, because some of the ihrams that they sell actually have clasps on them. So people do clasp them or like tie them together or something, and you can't do that. You can't wear gloves, for example. Glove is an example of something that like encompasses like a part of the body. Okay, a watch, like watches are permissible. Like even though, like for example, my watch, you can say, well, it encompasses like a part of your body, but it's not a piece of clothing. Okay, so it is permissible. So like I said, the important thing isn't that it not have stitching. It can have stitching. So for example, if you have slippers and it has stitching in them, like you don't have to wear those plastic rubber slippers that people wear. Like they don't have to be those plastic, those shower slippers. They can be slippers that have stitching on them, but it just can't encompass the body or go around fully the foot. Okay. What else does he mention? You can't oil the hair from your head or your body, even if it's not scented. Okay. He says شعر الرأس واللحية. So even if it's not scented, you can't oil the hair from your head or your beard. You can use oil on the rest of your body, but it can't be scented. Okay. And he says وَتَطْيِبُ جَمِيعَ الْبَدَنِ, that you can't use perfume. So anything that's considered like a scent or a perfume on the body, or the clothes, or in your food or your drink, you can't use it. And this is for men and for women. Okay, and the thing that's impermissible are things that are that people would use for like the purpose of a scent, even if it has other uses. So sometimes they give an example of like saffron, which they say is used for scent, even though it's used for cooking. So you can't use something like that. And the way that it's impermissible for these things that have a scent is like the way that it would usually be used. So if you have like incense, for example, the way that you would normally use it isn't to like rub it on your skin. The way that you would use it is to like allow the smoke to go on you. That would be impermissible. The way that like you might use musk, like a block of musk, is to like hold it. That would be impermissible. Like putting on like liquid perfume, that would be impermissible. Okay, and he mentions removing fingernails or hair. So you can't remove fingernails, like you can't clip your nails, or any method used to remove your nails. You can't do them, and you can't remove the hair from your head. If you're wearing clothes, like if you do put on clothes, or you cut 3 hairs, or you cut 3 fingernails, or you engage in foreplay, which is also impermissible, like short of intercourse, or you oil your body, then you have to pay a fidya. You have to pay an expiation, and that, which we said, is to sacrifice a sheep or to feed 6 poor people. It's by choice. You can do either of the 3, or to fast 3 days. Okay, so you can choose one of the 3. Okay, the author says وَيَحْرُمُ عَقْدُ النِّكَاحِ وَالْجِمَاعُ وَمُقَدِّمَاتُهُ وَإِتْلَافُ كُلِّ حَيَوَانٍ بَرِّيٍّ وَحْشِيٍّ مَأْكُولٍ. So this is the end of the section, and then he says وَالْمَرْأَةُ كَالرَّجُلِ فِي الْمُحَرَّمَاتِ. So this is the second category of things that are impermissible. So contracting a marriage is impermissible. وَيَحْرُمُ عَقْدُ النِّكَاحِ. So it's impermissible to contract a marriage, and it's also invalid. So it wouldn't be a valid contract. So it'd be impermissible to contract for yourself or to contract for someone else. So like, let's say you're the representative and you're in a state of ihram, then you couldn't contract the marriage. So it would be invalid, even if otherwise the marriage would have been, like at any other time the marriage would be sahih, like it would be valid, but in this case it wouldn't be. So let's say I'm in a state of ihram and I'm contracting a marriage for my brother, for example. That wouldn't be, even if my brother's not in a state of ihram, I can't do it. It wouldn't be valid. Okay? Or let's say a woman's in a state of ihram and her representative isn't in a state of ihram. Can he contract a marriage for her? No, because she's in a state of ihram, that he can't do it. Okay, so you can't do a nikah until you've done like the second tahallul. As we mentioned, there's two tahalluls. There are two ways to get out of a state of ihram. So it's only when you've exited the second stage, which is to fully exit a state of ihram, that you can contract a marriage. Okay, so that's the first thing that he mentions, aqd nikah. The second thing that he mentions is jima'. So jima' is intercourse. Um, 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 it's also impermissible in Hajj. The Quran says, فَلَا رَفَثَ وَلَا فُسُوقَ وَلَا جِدَالَ فِي الْحَجِّ. Right? And rafath, they interpret to mean intercourse. Okay, that it's impermissible in Hajj. So if a person does engages in intercourse during Umrah, it would ruin the Umrah, but the person still has to continue it and do it. If a person has intercourse in Hajj before the first tahallul, so we said there's two tahalluls. So if a person does it, engages in intercourse before the first tahallul, even if it's before Arafah, his Hajj would be invalid. Okay, and he would have to complete it. He would still have to complete it. Okay, so you wouldn't say, well, my Hajj is invalid because I engaged in intercourse, so I'm done. No, you'd have to continue it, and there's a kafara for it. That person would have to sacrifice a camel. Okay, if the intercourse is after the first tahallul, now it's after the first tahallul, but it's before the second one, it would be sinful, but it wouldn't render your Hajj invalid. So remember we said that after the first tahallul you can do pretty much everything. You can do everything that was impermissible except stuff that have to do with the opposite gender. So this person engages in intercourse after that first tahallul, so it's sinful, but his Hajj isn't invalid. He has to pay a kafara expiation. Okay, he has to pay a kafara, which is an expiation, and that's to sacrifice a sheep, or to feed 6 poor people, or to fast 3 days. Okay, and after the second tahallul, then intercourse is permissible. Okay, so the thing that is impermissible is intercourse that's vaginal intercourse. And foreplay short of intercourse is also impermissible, like kissing or hugging or touching with desire is impermissible. Okay, and the kafara, we said it's a camel. This is like in order. So if a person can't find a camel, then they would sacrifice a cow. If they can't find that, then they would sacrifice 7 sheep. If they can't find 7 sheep, they would value the camel in food, and they give it to the poor. And if they can't do that, then they would fast. They would fast for each like mud of food. They would fast a day, but that would be like a lot of days. So that I mean, it's theoretical. Now there are a lot of animals around, and it's not difficult to find that. But if a person had to fast the days for each, after valuing like the camel, it would be like 2,000 days that a person would have to fast. It'd be, it would be an extreme form of expiation. Okay, and that's before the first tahallul. We said if a person has intercourse after the first tahallul, their right isn't ruined, but they have to pay a sheep, or feed 6 poor people, or fast for 3 days. The last thing that the author rahimahullah mentions in the chapter of Hajj, he says وَإِتْلَافُ كُلِّ حَيَوَانٍ بَرِّيٍّ وَحْشِيٍّ مَأْكُولٍ. So a person in ihram, they can't hunt animals. They can't hunt animals. So they can't hunt animals, but they also can't like kill them or destroy them or do something that harms them. So that's not very it's not very likely in today's age that someone would go hunt like a wild animal while they're on Hajj. It's not very it's hard to envision, but it is nevertheless impermissible. The Quran says وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا الصَّيْدَ وَأَنْتُمْ حُرُمٌ, that don't hunt animals and you're in a state of ihram. So the author mentions a bunch of conditions that are related to this. He says barriyin, that it has to be a land animal, so it can't be it has to be something that lives on land, so it can't be like an aquatic animal or something that lives in water. Okay, so the thing that is impermissible are land things. Okay, so the Quran says وَحُرِّمَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصَّيْدُ الْبَرِّ مَا دُمْتُمْ حُرُمًا. So the Quran specifically says that like what's permissible for you is hunting things that are land animals, as long as you're in a state of ihram. Okay, so it doesn't cover, for example, like fish or something. Although I guess if you were like fish, you wouldn't really say that you're hunting. No one says I'm hunting fish, right? It also has to be like it has to be a wild animal, so it's not like a domesticated thing. So, but I mean that also holds true. Like you wouldn't say I'm going to go hunt like a chicken or something, right? Uh, yeah, and it has to be something that you can eat. So not like a wolf or something. If you were to kill a wolf or something, then it wouldn't have the same kafara. Okay, so we've talked about it as like in the context of hunting, which is the most common way in which you can think these things can be harmed. But you also can't harm them in any way. Okay? So you can't injure them or you can't drive them away even. You just have to let them be when you're in a state of ihram, and you can't take any of their parts. So, like you can't take their eggs even, and you can't take their milk and that kind of thing. So that is impermissible. And if a person were to do that, then there are specific expiations that are mentioned in larger works of fiqh. Okay, and the last thing the author says, وَالْمَرْأَةُ كَالرَّجُلِ فِي الْمُحَرَّمَاتِ, that a woman is like a man in all of the things that we've mentioned, except for two things. One, for covering her head, a woman has to cover her head, whereas for a man it's impermissible during Hajj, and wearing clothes. So like a man cannot wear, like we said, can't wear something that encompasses the body, but a woman can. A woman can. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the section on Hajj, and actually the section on ibadat in this book. And in our next two lessons, we'll cover the final section of the book, which is the chapter on, or the section on purification of the heart, or tazkiyat al-nafs. وصلى اللهم وسلم وزد وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.